Welcome to Happily Ever After is just the beginning. Keeping your relationship not just together, but happy, and we mean truly happy, is part art and part science. You've come to the right place. Here's your host, Leslie Dories.
When I ask my male clients what they want the most, I inevitably hear, I want my wife to be happy. And this is actually a wonderful thing, but I'm left thinking that it's also not attainable, at least not all the time, because no one can be happy all the time. That's because life and relationships are filled with ups and downs, good times and challenging ones. So is there something that can be of more use than simply focusing on happiness? Well, actually, the answer to that question is yes. It's called emotional resilience. And that's what I'm going to be talking about today with my guest, Brent Peak. He's a licensed professional counselor and a relational resilience coach. So, Brent, thank you so much for being here and talking about what I think is a really helpful conversation.
Thank you, Leslie. I'm really happy to be here with you today.
You are so welcome. You wrote a piece that appeared on the Good Men Project titled, How to Build Emotional Resilience. So can you define what emotional resilience actually is and why it matters?
Emotional resilience, I define it as the ability to face negative circumstances with maturity. We all face difficult circumstances in our life, and we all have these different strategies and ways of dealing with difficulties in our life, and unfortunately, a lot of the time, things just don't go the way we hope they will. When I think of my favorite metaphor for emotional resilience is Neo in the Matrix. Okay. Is it okay if I use a niche sci-fi reference here? Okay.
Absolutely.
So, in a couple of the movies there, in the first one and the second one, and probably in the later ones as well, I don't recall, but there's this scene somewhere in the movie where Neo is holding up his hand and there's all these bullets just paused in front of him. And that, to me, is emotional resilience right there. You know, there's a scene early on in the first movie where Morpheus is explaining to Neo the nature of the Matrix and who Neo is, or at least who he hopes he is. And Neo says, "Are you telling me I can dodge bullets?" And Morpheus says to him, "No, I'm not telling you can dodge bullets. I'm telling you that when you're ready, you won't have to."
Ooh.
And that, to me, is a great metaphor for emotional resilience. You don't see Neo at the end of the movie running around and begging people to stop shooting at him. You don't see him dodging the bullets anymore at the end. He just puts up his hand, demonstrating that resilience that he has in that universe. And I think that's a great metaphor for the way we can be with our emotions in difficult situations. And it matters because if we can't work towards that, then we are going to be constantly moving towards either unhealthy control or collapse in our relationships. And either way, we're just not being relational anymore, and we're going to lose the connection that we're hoping for with somebody else.
Well, I mean, I love that analogy, but you actually said something early that I want to grab onto, because you said something about being, emotional resilience being a sign of maturity. And, I think of maturity not in terms of chronological age, although I think a lot of people do.
Right.
I have met very mature 6-year-olds and very immature 20, or 60-year-olds, because I think it's more of is it a skill set? Is it a mindset? What would you call it? Or is it both?
Well, it is both. And in fact, that's how I would define the words flexibility and adaptability that I mentioned in the article. I think that flexibility is about mindset and adaptability is about skill set. So that's how I choose to categorize those. But to me, maturity, and there's probably a lot of different ways to define this, but I think for the purposes of working with folks in relationships, to me, maturity involves three things: humility, compassion, and self-control. being able to champion yourself with humility, being able to have compassion for yourself and others, which is shown in your respect for them and how you treat them and talk to them, and then self-control rather than trying to control the people, because without emotional resilience, we're going to be spending our time trying to control people and circumstances because we don't know how to control ourselves within and find peace within. So to me, maturity is about that inner game and a skill set that is more about being able to take care of your inner world without having to manipulate the outer world so that your inner world's okay.
Well, and I love that. But as I'm sure my readers are going, my listeners are going, but how do you do that? I mean, this is one of those things. And, to me, when you talk about emotional resilience or, being able to monitor your inner life, your own emotions, instead of trying to control the external world, because, short of science fiction or superhero movies, I don't think any of us really can control the external world. Even though that's what we all try to do, it sort of is like, how do you do this? I love the idea of humility and compassion, because, of course, those are critically important relational skills. But this idea of managing ourselves, and you use the Neo example, and I always use the Violet example from The Incredibles, where Violet's the one who can activate the protective bubble, so things are bouncing off the bubble, and that's something that we can do ourselves, but it's like nobody teaches us that in school, really. And this idea of that we actually do have the power to decide what we're going to do. And I think that's where you're talking about these two skills for building emotional resilience. And so I'd like to take them one at a time. The first one that you mentioned is flexibility. And so what exactly does it mean to be flexible, and how does it play into emotional resilience?
So, flexibility, and like I said earlier, flexibility is about mindset, adaptability is about skills, and we'll get into some skills in a little bit, but flexibility is about mindset. And the mindset that I think is the most critical here is being able to set a boundary of responsibility in your life and determining what do I need for my well-being and who is responsible for my well-being. Okay. I think the prime mindset that needs to be established for folks is what I would use almost like a mantra: my well-being comes from within, and my well-being is my responsibility. I cannot hold another person accountable for my well-being. Ultimately, it is up to me. So when it comes to relationships like a marriage or any romantic relationship or familial relationship or friendships even, when we lose our emotional resilience, it's typically because we have not kept this in mind, or we didn't realize it in the first place, or we haven't realized it to the degree that we really need to, that my well-being is my responsibility. And if I hold someone else responsible for my well-being and don't take responsibility for it myself, I will become manipulative and controlling. I will become resentful, and in worst cases, outright abusive.
And I love that, because this is, when my clients tell me that their goal, this is what I hear, is to make my wife happy. I'm like going, she's responsible for her own happiness. And but we have this idea, it's the whole, sorry, Jerry Maguire, you complete me crap, that somebody...
I could not agree more. I just told someone that yesterday, and I didn't say crap. I said something else.
I try not to swear on the show. Sometimes I'm not as successful. But yeah, I actually think of the other word as well. This, it's why it drives me crazy, this whole happy wife, happy life, all this stuff that's one. Yeah. The problem is that it's only focused on one person in the relationship, which I find completely unfair, but whatever. But it's this idea that, that I have wouldn't it be nice if I had the capacity to make other people happy or unhappy? What a power that would be. But I don't. And when I, and it just puts everybody in limbo land, because it's like, you can't make me happy. I can choose whether or not to be happy. And by the way, nobody can be happy all the time. Otherwise, that's just the status quo. And I'm still not quite sure why happy is the be all and end all, because I going again back to movies with WALL-E, with the people who are just blobs on the spaceship. They don't have to do anything.
Right.
Like, that's not really, I don't know, is that living? But this idea that I'm in charge of my own stuff, I think that's going to hit people as like, just, I don't even know, amazing. It's like, what, I'm in charge? Because to me that's empowering. If I give my power, my emotional power over to somebody else, that's not, but if I have it myself, that's actually empowering. So what does flexibility look like?
Well, hey, if I can, I kind of want to challenge a little bit the thing that you said earlier, that a lot of your listeners would say, I want my wife to be happy. Mm-hmm. I would counter that. I suspect that is still not totally an other-centered type of desire, but a little more self-centered. I want my wife to be happy so that I will feel okay.
Yes.
And that's where they're trying to please someone else and to control someone else's behavior. Because what does it look like if my wife's happy? Mm-hmm. My wife will stop nagging me. My wife will stop giving me a hard time about this or that. Mm-hmm. So essentially, they're trying to manipulate or control their spouse because they don't know how to find their well-being from within.
Oh,
and that, I think,
that's a perspective. Mm-hmm.
They're not taking responsibility for their well-being. Mm-hmm. They are saying, I'm not going to be happy unless my wife is happy. Now, they can do that in a controlling way. They can do that in a collapse sort of way where they just kind of play the victim. Mm-hmm. But ultimately, if I don't believe and don't practice finding my well-being from within, I will become manipulative and resentful. And so I think even a statement like that is somewhat manipulative. I wish there were a better word with a lesser degree of ill intent in it than manipulation. Mm-hmm. But manipulation, there is a severity scale of manipulation. And so some people do it in a very subtle way that isn't necessarily, trying to be deceitful or ill intent. Maybe they just want to have some peace in the house. Mm-hmm. And then you have at the other extreme, more outright abusive, controlling things that people do to try to get what they're hoping for in the relationship. But ultimately, if I don't have that mindset of being able to find my peace and well-being from within, I'm going to fall into those patterns of resentment and manipulation.
So how does flexibility make that possible? What does that mean?
Well, flexibility, the internal flexibility, rather than the rigidity of believing that things have to be a certain way.
Gotcha.
That I have to feel a certain way, and in order to feel a certain way, I need to make people act a certain way. Okay. And I'm not going to feel okay unless they change their behavior. Because when I think of the most common examples of a lack of emotional resilience with the folks that I work with, it is, I want to feel a certain way, and the only way I know how to do it is to get you to change something about you. Mm. And so again, we end up in that manipulation and control. Mm-hmm. And a flexible mindset says, I can accept how I'm feeling right now. I can accept that things aren't necessarily going to go the way I would like them to. I can accept that someone else isn't always going to be available to accommodate me. Mm. And the flexibility there comes in recognizing that I can find another way to be okay. I can find another